Well, the morning after Columbus's victory over Monterrey in the second leg, you began the morning as you always do by asking people what they're yelling about on X. And Andromeda replied that there is no gap between MLS and Liga MX, that we're actually better, but playing matches that early in the MLS season leads to teams not being full form as the Crew were last night.
Well, we talked time and time again about how MLS, especially from a salary cap and restrictions and rules and regulations, self-imposed and by design, is often playing with one foot behind their back. And it's not an excuse, it's just the reality. I don't, there are gaps that you can point to and obvious big differences, especially when it comes to spending and certainly history when it comes to the two leagues. But I don't think that I agree with Andromeda over there on X in that I don't think there is a gap between MLS and Liga MX. And as a matter of fact, I think you can point to some different things, especially when it comes to the business, the growth, the resources, the relevance of MLS. At times, I think you could actually point and say that the pendulum has swung and has stuck on the MLS side. So I agree with you there. Whether or not the Crew win or not, I know that that is part of the equation and part of the conversation, but there are bigger things at play and bigger things when you're doing this compare and contrast. Mosse, what do you think?
It's amazing. A few years ago, the fans saved the Crew, and this spring, the Crew saved MLS's reputation because it was a disastrous CONCACAF Champions Cup campaign otherwise. But this Columbus run has completely shifted the narrative. It's given MLS fans their swagger back. It's wiped the smiles off the faces of Liga MX fans. And now you've got this one-off final, 50-50. And it's amazing, given what the narrative was throughout the last few weeks, that you could end up in the end with an MLS team holding the trophy. So it's remarkable.
Whether it's fair or not is irrelevant, but to use, in this case, CONCACAF Champions Cup as the reason why for everything, I don't think it's right. I don't think it's fair. I get why we're doing it, and I'm certainly have been guilty of it in the past of using it going forward. But again, what to your point, the perception of the leagues is oftentimes dramatically associated and connected, whether fair or not, with what happens on the field in CONCACAF Champions Cup. So well done, Crew. Again, that's like the fourth time that I've said well done and congratulations to the Crew this show. My God, they're getting a lot of love.
Also on X, Cyber Snork asks, you've probably answered this already. Do you think MLS will ever go to a European schedule, and what are the challenges that are keeping it from happening?
Well, the challenges are obvious when it comes to something like the weather, and plenty of these teams that for a chunk of the year are playing in weather that is very, very difficult. And as far as MLS has come and as robust as it has become, it's a labor of love, but it's still a labor. And there are still people that are pushing this boulder up this hill, especially when it comes to selling soccer in these communities. And the reality is that it's much more difficult when it's bad weather, especially in all of these stadiums that are not roofed. And so you can't have any type of climate control. If they all had roof stadiums, it'd be different. But then you would have the other problem of going up against the juggernaut that is the NFL. And people say, well, it doesn't matter when you do it in the year because there's always something to go up against. Yes, but you have to be smart and you have to be realistic about what MLS is relative to the NFL and the amount of oxygen and attention that the NFL takes. And so if you were to start at the exact same time that the NFL is starting, that could be problematic. So I don't see it happening anytime soon for those reasons that we stated. I could possibly see a splitting of the schedules going forward, and it does give you some challenges relative to the rest of the world. And so while I certainly would love what everybody is on the same schedule, it's just a very different country, culture, and history that MLS and all soccer leagues have had to work within and work through, and sometimes make some very different types of choices. But they end up being prudent when you look at the realities on and off the field of what America is relative to its sports and its history and the competition for the dollar, whether it's sponsorships or whether it's fans out there, or whether it's eyeballs, media, all that kind of stuff. Relative to all of these other much more established and much more popular leagues than Major League Soccer, NWSL, USL, and the list goes on and on and
on. Next up, we have a voicemail. Let's take a listen.
Hey, guys. This is Andrew Cody. coming from Waxahachie, Texas. Hey, I actually wanted to do an Ask the Mosse question. Hope that's okay if we can change it up. I was wondering, in the EPL, who's your starting 11 Brazilian team? Who's playing in the EPL right now? Who is that? Mosse, can you help me out with that? Alexi, you're welcome to jump in, but I feel like Mosse is the expert here, as he is on most. But I really enjoy the show, yeah.
All right, thank you, Andrew from Texas. Yeah, listen, we love questions to Mosse, and I love this question, Mosse. The floor is yours.
Well, first of all, I just want to use this question to highlight an interesting transfer market trend in the last several years. I'm old enough to remember when Brazilians used to avoid England like the plague. They used to gravitate to Italy and Spain because they thought they could adapt better to the lifestyle in those countries and the style of play in those leagues. And that's really changed in the last several years. There are now more than 30 Brazilians in the Premier League. It's the most of any of the top 5 European leagues. And yeah, you could easily put together a team. Now, you could probably put together an entire squad of Brazilian players. In the last World Cup, half the Brazilian squad was Premier League players. Now, I have to say, some of that is because Brazilians go where the money is. And I think they can take that sometimes to a ridiculous extreme. There's no world where there should be Brazilians on Nottingham Forest and Crystal Palace, but not on AC Milan. I think there's this notion that's crept into the minds of Brazilian players that because the Premier League is the best league in the world, any move to a Premier League team is defensible from a sporting standpoint. And I'm sorry, it isn't always defensible. Sometimes there are better options in other leagues, and you can't just go to England and say, well, that's fine because it's the Premier League. So that's my little rant there before I lay out my team. As far as, here's how I approach this, okay? Some of the players I'm going to name actually have not had great seasons, so I'm adopting a formless fallacy philosophy here. It's just, in general, my overall opinion of these players, who the best ones are. If I were to put together a Brazilian team out of Premier League players, this is, I think, the best possible lineup I could come up with. I'm going to do a 3-4-3 formation. I'm going to put Alisson in goal. I prefer him to Ederson. I think he's a better shot stopper. And then the back three is going to be Thiago Silva, who is leaving the Premier League at the end of the season and probably going back home to play for Fluminense. But nevertheless, as of this taping, he's still a Premier League player, so he counts. Gabriel Magalhães and Murilo from Nottingham Forest. That would be the back three. The midfield four would be Douglas Luiz, Bruno Guimarães, Lucas Paquetá, and Andreas Pereira. And then my front three would be the Arsenal pair, Gabriel Martinelli and Gabriel Jesus, along with João Pedro of Brighton, who's a player I love, who scored this past weekend against Aston Villa. Actually had a penalty saved, but put in the rebound. So that's my best Brazilian 11 of players currently in the Premier League. Now, again, if I was adjusting it for form, there are guys like Matheus Cunha and Rodrigo Muniz who have arguably had better seasons than some of the players I mentioned, but I think those are better players in general, the ones I said. So that's who I'm going with for the purposes of this exercise.
Wow. I mean, it sounds like a pretty good team, Mosse. I think you answered that incredibly for Andrew over there in Texas. We'll see if he and others agree with your 11s there. Who did you not have on that really you were dying to have on, but you just couldn't work it?
I don't know if there's anybody in that category, but Casemiro not being in there is notable.
Yeah.
I've just seen such a drop off in him this season that I couldn't justify putting him in there. Richarlison is a big name that started for Brazil at the last World Cup, so you could argue he's a notable guy to leave off. But I've just never been a big fan of his. I prefer Jesus to Richarlison as a player, so I went the way I went.
Awesome. All right. Well, I hope that answers your question there, Andrew. You like that clip? Well, my State of the Union podcast drops twice a week right here on my very own YouTube page. The only way to stay up to date is to hit that subscribe button down below. Size the day, and see you soon.